Hey there, my name's Jerry Shannon. I'm a faculty member at the University of Georgia. Hope to be with all of you in Denver at AAG, but alas, that was not in the cards. And so I'm going to present today on some ongoing research I've got around dollar stores and the relationship between dollar store location and racial segregation in major U.S. metropolitan areas. So there's only about 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here just to give some context here. We're going to talk a little bit about the background for this research, which is past work on food access and so-called food deserts. The term I prefer, supermarket redlining, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. Briefly touch on the growth of dollar stores over the last 10 years, which motivates the study, talk about the research questions, and then run through analysis and hopefully provide a few different takeaways. So we'll go ahead and jump into this. Most of you, or many of you, may have seen this map before. This is from USDA's Food Access Research Atlas online. You can Google it if you want to find it. This is the most commonly used map of what's called food deserts, right? They call them low-income, low-access areas, but really this is what a lot of people talk about when they're talking about food deserts, which are areas that are low-income with low access to supermarkets. And this metric has been around for a while. We're talking about over 10 years. At this point, it's been widely used and also widely critiqued, right? So empirically, the presence of a food desert hasn't really lined up with health outcomes in the way that people hypothesized it might early on in this research. Conceptually, the term food desert depoliticizes both the historical and current political environment that creates and maintains these kinds of disparities. So it treats these as kind of glitches or problems rather than features of a conventional food system which systematically underserves low-income neighborhoods. And I think in that way kind of bounds the problem in ways that aren't very helpful for what we're looking at. Also leaves out things like, say, transportation, wage disparities, things like that. And there's been a lot of work looking at this. Don't have time to go into a lot of it, but there's great work out there treating them as food swamps rather than food deserts is maybe a little bit better. There's certainly a little bit more empirical evidence that, say, the presence of fast food correlates with some of the health outcomes we've been interested in. But also broadening discussion just beyond just calories and obesity. I think framing this as food apartheid gets at this in terms of dealing with some of the racial disparities that have been brought up in the food justice literature. And if you haven't read Ashante Reese's excellent book, Black Food Geographies, there's some great historical work there, digging into the kind of racist planning that's gone into supermarket locations over time, as well as ways to move beyond just thinking about this as an issue of calories and obesity, I think, and issues of community autonomy and community identity is really helpful. And my own work, I've used the term supermarket redlining, and I've got a couple of references here that you can look at. I think that places it within an urban planning context that I think is useful, both because redlining is a contributor to the growth of supermarkets and the consolidation within the food system that has produced the kinds of disparities that we see, and also because redlining captures the idea that this is really about capital investment in food retail in low-income neighborhoods and who goes where. In particular, this study that's in social science and medicine caught as a motivator for this research because one of the things I looked at was dollar store chains. And while I thought going in that dollar stores were dollar stores, when you look at the locations, this is in Atlanta, you can see they really do occupy very different places. And so, Dollar General is largely in the outer suburbs. Dollar Tree is in the north metro. The city of Atlanta is right here. And Family Dollar is really in core urban areas. And that was really a surprise to me and made me think through what are the differences between these stores that account for that, right? So when we're talking about dollar stores, I am mainly talking about these three chains. There are other kinds of so-called, you can get things for $1 stores out here, but there's about 30,000 of these three stores out there right now. There's Dollar General, and then Dollar Tree actually bought Family Dollar, is my understanding, a few years ago. So while there's still these two chains, it's one company that controls both of them. You can see the growth here. This is data from SNAP authorized retailer listings, which is not all of them, especially at the beginning of the study period. If you look at Family Dollar going from 2008 to 2009, you'll see how a bunch of new stores get added. And my understanding is, a lot of those stores were just becoming SNAP authorized for the first time, and that has implications for my analysis. For this particular paper, which is currently in revision that I'm describing today, I'm looking at how dollar store expansion and how that growth that we see on that map in urban areas. So 27 of the largest urban areas that are shown on this map here, 3 in each of the census divisions over time, how expansion in these metros is linked to ongoing patterns of racial segregation, net of population and income, right? So if we think about supermarket redlining, if we're thinking about how retail system reflects disparities that are created through all sorts of policies, contributes to disparities, racialized disparities within urban space. How does looking at the growth of dollar stores can help build on our understanding of those processes? So I'm going to walk through kind of a descriptive analysis briefly in the time that I've got left. I've also got two different kinds of models. So I did repeated cross-sectional models. That is, I ran one linear regression. It's a mixed effects model or a multi-level model controlling for cities. So cities, this happened differently a little bit in each city in systematic ways. So I control for that. But there's cross-sectional models that just look at particular time points, and then I look across time using first difference models as well, and those tell different kinds of stories, which we'll get into here. So one other quick note, I'm using the mixed metro system of classification. You can look up their website if you want more information on that. It's a helpful, I think, measure of racial segregation, at least for the cross-sectional models, because it captures kind of holistically what the demographic composition of a given census tract is. And so you can see that listed on the map here. So let's talk about descriptive numbers. You can see here, this is distance to the closest store in both 2011 and 2015. I don't start in 2008, which is the first year I have data, because of the fact that many stores weren't SNAP authorized at that time. And you can see that there is some real, some patterns here. So if we start with just looking at African-American majority or plurality tracts, so black low diversity and black moderate diversity, that is, talking about tracts that are 80% black versus 50 or 60% African-American. You can see, first of all, that the distance is pretty small, so under 5 miles throughout the study period. But even then, there's a pretty good downward trend for all store chains. So yellow is Dollar General, green is Dollar Tree, red is Family Dollar, and then this black line is just the closest overall store over time. And this is the median value over time. So then we've also got grocers and supermarkets overall as a category listed here as a frame of reference. So we can see that it's low and decreasing distance to dollar stores in those tracts. Whereas if we look at predominantly white areas, what we see is that overall the distances are higher, and that in some cases distances increased over time, particularly for Family Dollar. So you can see for both low and moderate diversity tracts, distance increased over time. The distances decreased somewhat for Dollar Tree, but not quite as striking. So here we're looking at now cross-sectional models, which are looking at it 3 time points, 2008, 2011, and 2015. What's the correlation between a variety of predictors, but I'm going to talk about today these neighborhood-level classifications and distance to the closest grocery store. This is a logged dependent variable, which means that we're looking at as odds. So for instance, an odds ratio. So for instance, if we look at black moderate diversity neighborhoods in 2011, if you're in a black moderate diversity tract, the closest Family Dollar, which is this red dot, is it's around 0.57, which means it's roughly 40% closer than it would be in the reference group, which is white moderate diversity neighborhoods, which is the most prevalent classification in our data set. So 40% closer in those neighborhoods, and that stays pretty consistent over time. That association is less clear for the other 2 chains, the yellow and green, Dollar General and Dollar Tree, right? That's also similar in black low diversity neighborhoods. Actually, that coefficient is even larger. Here we're looking at 60% closer in those neighborhoods. We see a similar pattern in Latino, moderate and low diversity neighborhoods as well, right? The inverse is true in white low diversity neighborhoods, that here the average Family Dollar is 25% further away in 2011 and 2015 than it would be in a white moderate diversity neighborhood. And interestingly, we also see for poverty that percentage in poverty has actually got a positive number here, meaning in a higher poverty area, the Dollar Tree, the green dot, would be further away than it would be in an area with lower rates of poverty. So that those stores tend to correlate with potentially lower poverty neighborhoods. And I think that's interesting as well. The last thing I'll point out is there's a narrative out there about supermarket distance and grocery distance that dollar stores are replacing these stores. And in these cross-sectional models, there's not a lot of evidence for that. There's a positive association, which means that a higher distance to the closest supermarket or grocery is predictive of the closest supermarket or grocery being further away, the closest dollar store being further away as well, right? So that we're seeing as supermarkets and groceries are getting further, dollar stores are getting further. And I think what that reflects is simply that retail environments are, we have single-use zoning. These stores tend to locate in similar kinds of areas. And so if you're far away from one type of store, you're probably far away from another one as well. So that's a kind of real brief view of this. This is a first difference model. So this is controlling for tract level differences that aren't observed. And what we do is we take what's the distance in 2015, which is the last year we have good census data, and see what the change was from 2011. So did the distance go up or down? And how does that associate with changes in other predictive variables? And here, because of the nature of the model, I had to use percentage rates from census data for demographics. So it's percent African American, percentage Hispanic. And one of the things that stands out here is that there's not really strong associations. Here we're not talking about odds, we're talking about a change in miles. So for instance, for Dollar Tree, a 1% increase in percentage African American meant the average store was 0.014 miles further away. There's an effect there that's significant, but it's not very large at all. 0.014 miles, that means 0.14 miles if there's a 10% change, which would be pretty dramatic, but the effect is not all that big. The one thing that I will point out here, though, that stands out, and I think some of that has to do with the fact that I'm using American Community Survey, which takes 5-year samples. It tends to smooth change over time, and it could be that we just need a longer time frame to see a more significant association here. The one magnitude that does stand out, though, is grocery distance. So I talked earlier about the narrative of dollar stores replacing groceries, and this is actually a place where we see some evidence of that. So we've got, for grocery distance, the coefficient is negative 0.214. And that is to say, if the average grocery gets 1 mile further away, the average Family Dollar is 0.214 miles closer. Again, it's not necessarily huge, but it does point to a pretty significant, in terms of magnitude, association between those two, that Family Dollars are coming into places where groceries maybe are getting further away. Now, what's the causal chain there? We can't quite answer that. I don't know that the data that I've got really shows what's going on here. My sense is probably what's happening is the grocery stores are leaving and then the Family Dollars are coming in. But I think that we need some more data on that. So I'm running out of time, but some real quick takeaways here. First, I think these models, particularly the cross-sectional models, show a pretty convincing association between patterns of segregation and dollar store locations. And that's true if you looked back at these models back here. If you look at even for Dollar General, that the trend is down, that we're seeing the significance increase over time. That while for black low diversity neighborhoods, Dollar Generals were further away, right, in 2008. They're much closer in 2015. They're apt to be closer in there over time. So this is a pattern that's increasing as we move through the study period. And basically, if these stores are looking at racial demographics, or at least responsive to racial demographics. And in that sense, I think there's broader questions that are raised about how dollar stores are both profiting from and responding to a racialized system of labor. So if we think about the ways that ongoing work in racial capitalism and black geographies have talked about race as a key factor in how capitalism works, given dollar stores' focus on working class, moderate to low income households, to what extent are these stores kind of benefiting or drawing profit off the system? That's a bigger question we can't get into here. There's also a growing number of communities that are regulating these stores, roughly 20 municipalities that are drawing up regulations that regulate or ban growth of these stores, and I think this puts that kind of political work, policy work, into a pretty important context, right? That what's at stake here is how are these stores shaping the economic and cultural trajectories of these neighborhoods. So that's my brief run through these data. Feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions. I'm happy to talk more about this research, and again, we'll hopefully have some work published on it soon. The data itself is available at this GitHub address, and you can take a look there. Thanks so much.